Welcome back. We're still watching Daybreak on this 6th day of August 2024. Dr. Makali Mulu is the Member of Parliament for Kitui Central. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, viewers.
He's also a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee and Vice Chair of the, is it Public Debt?
Public Debt and Privatization Committee.
Correct. That's an important committee. Alex Kanyi is a tax expert from CDH Kenya. Good morning.
Morning, Sam.
It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yes.
I think the last time we saw you was just before Finance Bill 2024 was lost.
Quite an interesting time. Quite an interesting time.
So it's good to see you again here. Richard Onyonka, Senator of Kisii County. Good morning.
Sorry, good morning. Good morning. How are you?
I am all right. Good to see you again. I saw you some 6 or 7 days ago.
I'm happy to be here this morning. I just love the newspaper.
You love the newspaper?
It has everything you want to see in the morning.
What does that mean?
I mean, can you imagine of all days to look at a newspaper and to see Moses Kuria saying how he wants to join Azimio?
Going to see Baba.
He went to see Baba.
He was pledging loyalty.
And this is Moses Kuria, who was saying how he can't understand why people are carrying sufurias.
He's saying that Baba has once again saved the country from destruction.
That can only come from Moses Kuria.
Okay, all right. It's good to have all of you. We're still expecting Duncan Madenga, who is the Member of Parliament for Nyeri Town. As soon as he's here, he'll be on set to have this conversation. And the papers, like you're saying, the standard lead story is Gachagua. I know they are after me. And they are giving some few quotations there, saying that Deputy President tells his backyard there are efforts to intimidate him. There's an impeachment motion against him in the works, and his friends are being bullied by government, but he says he's here to stay. Then you see that story, not so fast. Ruto in fresh finance fiasco of a spending plan. Yesterday, the ink on the assent on the Appropriations Act had dried. Activists were... Well, rather, before the ink dried, activists were in court challenging its legality. Then puzzle of Ruto's housing project is the main story that is on the Daily Nation, but there's also that story about the 2027 calculation in rising stars of Kalonzo Natembeya in Mount Kenya. Former VP Kalonzo Musyoka and Trans Nzoia Governor George Natembeya could benefit from the uncertainty surrounding Mount Kenya politics amid a growing feeling DP Gachagua is being sidelined in President Ruto's government. So we'll not begin with that. We'll come to that later on. But first, we are talking about the implications of just what happened last week. And we mentioned a bit of it yesterday about the Court of Appeal declaring Finance Act 2023 to be unconstitutional, meaning that legally it cannot continue to be used to collect revenue for the country. But it's important to know that it doesn't mean that the government cannot collect revenue. It can, because there are different laws that facilitate that. Alex, let's begin with you. First of all, on the implication, especially now that the judgment, I think, was on Wednesday. That's when you received it. We haven't heard of any movement so far. There are reports that there could have been notice of motion at the Supreme Court, but no specific orders. What should be happening if you have to look at how law works? Once a judgment has been rendered, is it effective immediately, or is it subject to interpretation by the Attorney General's office or the government or whoever is the implementing agency?
Yeah, I think once the Court of Appeal rendered its decision, that decision was effective immediately when it was made. And the only way to reverse that or hold that is through a stay, either through the Court of Appeal or through the Supreme Court. And an attempt has been made towards applying for stay of the decision of the Court of Appeal. The National Treasury had hoped that the Supreme Court would issue the stay immediately, meaning that Finance Act 2023 would have continued to apply as it were. However, the direction of the court was that they need to take time to listen to that application by the National Treasury, so they will not issue stay orders until they hear that application. The good thing is that the court is quite aware of the implications of this particular decision of the Court of Appeal, and therefore the application for stay will be heard on a priority basis. So
have they indicated how soon that would be?
As at yesterday, the parties were supposed to file their submissions. Parties to the case were supposed to file their submissions, and then the court will give its decision or notice. So there is no specific date that has been provided so far. But what I anticipate is maybe within a month or two, that will be done in terms of just deciding whether an application for stay is merited or not. And then the case will continue for hearing, meaning looking at the substance of the case until it is determined by the Supreme Court. Give or take, I'm looking at about 6 months to a year for that decision to be made.
So in the meantime, if you're saying that the decision on stay orders, we should expect it between 1 and 2 months, then what happens in the interim?
A good question. So what happens is that we continue with the tax laws as they were before Finance Act 2023. So you still have your Income Tax Act, you still have your Value Added Tax Act, Excise Duty Act, and all these other legislations that provide for tax. So only the amendments that were done through Finance Act 2023 are the ones which will perhaps wait until a decision is made. And I'll give an example. So up to Finance Act 2023, especially for pay-as-you-earn, the bans were up to 30% as the highest rate. Yeah. So, however, Finance Act 2023 introduced a ban for 32.5% for anyone earning between 500,000 and 800,000 per month, and a ban for 35% for anyone earning above the 800,000. Yeah. Right. So what it means, and I've had people asking this question, is that as you process your payroll, you have to think about what were the effective rates before Finance Act 2023 until a decision is made by the court, by the Supreme Court. So
if payrolls close towards the end of the month, that can be done that time. But VAT and fuel was doubled from 8% to 16%. You're saying the court judgment is effective immediately. The VAT is still 16% at the pump today.
Well, I'm not surprised with the petrol situation. And I think I don't know, for some reason, they don't effect those changes immediately. And it's not the first time. So I've had, I think I've read in the news that they're awaiting some interpretation or guidance from the Attorney General. Maybe they're also waiting, because they do their reviews every mid-month. I don't know whether they're waiting for mid-month, so that then they tell us we have considered the judgment, and therefore will reduce your fuel costs by another 8%, especially for VAT.
That's interesting, because when it was doubled last year, it was effective immediately, 1st of July, and it was at the end of the month, but they announced it and said that that's what was happening. Never mind, that time there was actually stay orders that they ignored. But
that's why I said it's interesting. So I have no idea what kind of advice they get and how they implement it it's questionable.
Dr. Makali Mulu, what is your reaction to what just happened, especially when it comes to a time that government has been really working so hard to mobilize revenue? Then this happens. What is your reaction as a member of parliament?
Thank you, Sam. You know, Sam, the nullification of the Finance Act 2023 by being declared unconstitutional brought about quite serious effects to the government finances. And agreeing with what Alex is saying, in an ideal situation, when you say the act is unconstitutional, it means automatically then you can't apply that act in terms of taxes. But normally the government will drag their feet before they implement because of the implication in terms of reduction of revenue. And this even becomes more complicated, bearing in mind that then the 2024 finance bill was also not approved, meaning then that's an additional all to our finances. And I think the figures have been worked out in terms of what is the implication, the total figures. For example, like when you say VAT was supposed to be reduced from 16 to 8, when he talks about the income tax bands changing because of that effect, you remember the issue of also the rental income, which was 10%. It is now supposed to move from 7.5 again back to 10%. So the totality of those changes was that the government was going to realize a financing gap of an additional 211, about 11 billion. And bearing in mind there was another already a haul of 346 from the finance bill of 2024. That's a totality of about over 500 billion, which the government will not be able to collect. And now the challenge is, now if you are not able to collect those resources, then what happens? And I think that's a question now which everybody in this country who has interest in finances, public finances, is asking, because some of this money was collected and used to carry out government programs and projects. Now when you engage the Act, we've already done a budget, the 2024-2025 budget, and part of that projected revenue was also coming from 2023 Act. So you can see the challenges the government is facing. And really, as a finance person, then you actually, from where I sit, I see the government being in a fixed in a corner somewhere. And to get out of that corner, we will need the goodwill of quite a number of stakeholders. I'm telling you, the courts might be right in what they are saying, but from where I sit, it might get to a point where you just say, for the sake of public interest and what we saw, provision of public goods, you see, we say at this point now, we might have to think about shelving some of these court resolutions to take care of the country. This is a matter of now public interest versus the legal framework.
What would be the route to that?
The route to that is just for the situation where you can go to Supreme Court and the judges look at the case and say, this case is merited, we should be able to throw this act out completely, but for purposes of public interest, then they give different recommendations to sustain the country. You'll not be surprised if you see that. Because when you look at the Finance Act, Finance Acts normally are like what we call the omnibus. They carry out. You're
telling me the Supreme Court that is there to interpret and defend the Constitution can actually okay an unconstitutional finding?
It's not the first time. Things have happened in the past like that. Where for the sake of public interest. Because, at the end of the day, even as you make laws and all that, there is something called public interest, which is not written on law, but is always considered as
you think the Court of Appeal did not consider the public interest?
No, I think, now, they might not be able to do that at that lower court, but when it gets to the Supreme Court, there are cases like, you look at it, it merits making a different decision, but you make a different decision because of public, and it will be documented that the reason why we have made this decision is for the sake of ensuring that the country remains in terms of public finances. But let's see how it goes, but automatically what should have happened is that by now we should be saying, don't impose those taxes. And the point I was trying to bring is when you look at the Finance Act, it's like a miscellaneous law. It amends so many other acts. So once you negate it, then it means you refer to the original act before amendments were implemented. And those are basically that's the situation.
Senator Onyonka, what's your take, especially when it comes to Parliament is indicted that it really failed to follow the laid out procedure in enacting of laws? And especially the question of public participation that the Court of Appeal says there are certain new sections that are introduced post-public participation and never taken to fresh public participation. What are we learning?
What we are learning is that commonsensically, it means that if you want to be governing well and if you want to be governed well, let's follow the law. And the reason why, and I've always raised this issue, Sami, the reason why you have such complications coming and following us now is simply because of the points I've raised before. That, for example, and I'm sure Dr. Makali will agree with me, if we had a structure where we actually just maintain a balanced budget, which most commonsensical countries do, then we would not have found ourselves to where we are today. That's number one. Number two, from 2023 up to now, what I'm worried about is that everything in terms of budgeting of our finances, going through the PFM Act, all these events have got timelines. I don't know whether Professor Makali will agree with me. So the worry that I've got is that these timelines, what is going to overlap what? In other words, like right now, we are supposed to start discussing at the Senate in the Budget Committee where I sit on sector hearings, for example.
Right.
You get the data that is going to help you interpret how the sector performed in terms of its tax collection and tax remuneration. But now where are we? We are going to start these sector reform discussions, and yet we don't have any data that will help us to decide whether the tax which was implemented last financial year, which now is not there, what the impact was.
Okay.
I don't know whether the Kenyans will understand what I'm saying, but I think most people will. So we are caught, like he has said, between a rock and a hard place. One of the things that Treasury is going to have to do, I think using 227, they'll continue saying, look, you are allowed to continue spending whatever that we are collecting, depending on what the controller budget, the central bank, and the Treasury tell you. But what are we going to do in the next, for example, 2 months? Now that's where even me, I'm like, okay, unless we go to the Supreme Court, like Dr. Makali has said, and the court then will say, for example, they can say, we stop all the financial activities that were from the 2 financial years because of the complexity of this financial matrix, and then we will now proceed with, for example, the minimums or the maximums that we picked from 2022. In other words, they do what you call a rollover.
Right.
But that then, like they said, will have to completely be determined by this thing that we are calling public interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And Alex, so what would be, I don't know if you have any reactions to what they're saying.
Yeah, I have some reactions to that.
But also, what would be the alternatives now? So, fine, you can go to the Supreme Court and seek a way out. If I recall, when the Finance Act of 2023 was challenged, partly successfully at the High Court, about the housing levy, the government was very quick in introducing a bill for affordable housing. Eventually it became an act, and in fact, even if this decision has been made, it doesn't affect that. Are there alternatives? I had, and you'll be listening to Honorable John Mbadi speaking on the, when he was being vetted, that you can actually introduce some of these amendments separately.
Yes, there are alternatives.
Yep.
And one of the things that I have said in some write-up that we've shared is that we expect a tax laws amendment bill, and that's just my thinking. And what the government might try to do with the tax laws amendment bill is introduce some changes within our tax laws, and perhaps could bring back, if at all, some of the things that could have fallen through Finance Act 2023 and perhaps even Finance Bill 2024. One of them, which we thought would have been in Finance Bill and Finance Act 2024, was on the extension of the tax amnesty program, which we had the chair for Finance and National Planning actually discuss it towards the tail end of the discussion of Finance Bill. So I'm already, and they're already talking about a 30 billion plan in terms of collecting that money, even before we have the laws to support it. So I think there is a plan and to come up with such an amendment, which will reintroduce some of the tax laws. But coming back to public participation, and not to preempt what the Supreme Court will say, the Supreme Court has already pronounced itself on what amounts to public participation and been very clear that it has to be realistic, not cosmetic. It's not just a tick the box exercise. And noting that the Court of Appeal is saying that public participation, and especially on the 18 new clauses, wasn't done, then I think the Supreme Court itself will be in a hard position as to what to do with the appeal. Even if, you know, we want to talk about public interest, when you talk about clauses that have been introduced without public participation at all, then we have a problem. And two, having participated in the hearings and perhaps even providing comments to Mheshimiwa Kuria's team, and having looked at the reports that came out, some of the things that stakeholders were recommending and were outside Finance Bill 2024 as previously drafted were rejected, and the reasoning was these have not been subjected to public participation. They are new things that you're introducing to the bill and have not been subjected to public participation, therefore we will not consider them. Then, on the other hand, you have 18 clauses which have been added, which were not in the bill, and then you want to say that those ones actually went through public participation. So you can imagine the kind of difficulties that the Supreme Court will have, considering what I've just told you. Yeah.
Okay. And of course, Mheshimiwa Duncan Mathenge from Nyeri Town has now joined us. And good morning, Mheshimiwa.
Good morning, Sam.
Great. We are taking a short break. When we come back, we'll start with him on unpacking the decision of the Court of Appeal, the implications, but also, as Alex here is talking about some of the alternatives, there's also a question about the process of budgeting and saying that the PFM Act should be able to guide that. The Court of Appeal found that that wasn't followed, which has to take into consideration not just the expenditure, but also the revenue-raising measures. We have that conversation after the break. Stay tuned.